Chapter 11 Conflict Cat Combat, in which our mobs get to damage and defeat each other. What if attempting to move into a tile occupied by another mob instead would attack the mob in that square? We could make it so that mobs can hit each other. But what happens when they hit? Should a monster die and disappear as soon as someone hits it? That seems a bit too abrupt. It would also kill us in a single hit. If you think about it, arcade games often work that way. Everybody has to avoid being hit by bullets and dies if they are hit. Typically, you then restart the current level, having 3 such lives in total. Some games instead operate with a shield, where you can take between 1 and 3 hits before your spaceship is destroyed. But our game is not a real-time arcade game. It's more like a kind of chess game. Chess is strange too. In chess, your king only has 1 life, and you lose the game as soon as he takes any hit. The reason this works is that the king is not the game. In chess, all your other pieces take hits, and once enough of your pieces have been hit, they are unable to further protect your king from being hit. We could introduce the concept of a mob's hit points, which means you can take as many hits as you have hit points. Once you're reduced to 0, you have lost. Some attacks might hit for several points at once. Let's add a hit point counter HP number to all the mobs and initialize this counter to start out with, for example, 3. We also need a max hit point number, because if we regain lost hit points by healing, we need to stop again if we reach our maximum hit points. Otherwise, a winning strategy would just be to keep on healing to get 1,000,000 hit points and be invincible. So, 09mob.ts will now look like this. If we are going to hit, it's only fair the NPC enemies can hit us too. We could update our old AI 1 sheep to use a hit command, but instead we'll create a new monster AI. 05 AI 11 mob AI 2 cat, which looks like this. We'll not need our old sheep AI after this point, so we'll clone our Builder 2A into Builder 2B and change the parts that make sheep into cat making parts instead. This just switches to glyph.cat instead of glyph.sheep. There's nothing deeper behind it. Now behold 11 Builder 2B. The difference to mob AI 1 sheep will be that we will now use move bump command instead of move command. For that, we'll need the 11 move bump command. It checks whether the intended cell already holds a mob and diverts to hit command if it does. Otherwise, it forwards to the original move command. So we must provide 11 hit command. Our first version just docks the defender 1 hit point unconditionally. To show our good intentions, it also logs the perceived event, someone hitting somebody for a certain amount of damage. This log, for now, is just the internal console log. Later, we will figure out a proper outlet for such event, a combat log. To now run this and try it out, we can make index 11 cat. There are a couple of things wrong or weird with this initial sketch. For one, no one will know about this damage, unless they check the internal log and have some idea how many hit points people started out with. And there are no real consequences to being hit. Your hit points will go to 0, then to -1, then to -2. But passing 0 was supposed to be death. And attacks always hit, always for 1. But what about attacks missing or hitting extra hard? The always hits thing could be solved as easily as RNDC range 0 to 2. The worst issue is the lack of death. If death worked, the missing status update maybe could be tolerated, given that death is a sort of status update. I might not notice when someone has lost 1 or half their hit points, but surely I will notice when they have lost all their hit points on account of you or me being dead. Still, we will address the lack of hit point feedback too. Once we can track the player's current hit points, we can easily tell whether our death support works. When we see a 0 in the player's hit points, we should see some death too, and vice versa. No death unless the hit points are at or below 0. We must deal with 2 kinds of death. The death of enemy NPCs should make them disappear from the turn's queue and map, hopefully without messing up the turn order. The death of the player should instead cause some sort of game over. Our plan for the initial version is this. We will make hit damage more interesting. We will display the player's hit points on screen so the player can bite his nails. We will address the player's death, and we will address the death of mobs. More dynamic combat. Let's first fix the always hits for 1 issue, since it requires so little work. Adjust the first part of hit command.exec to be RNDC 03. With this, we got out of the boring let's see who can count down to 0 first situation. We will later make combat more interesting in other ways. Be aware that some might hate the chance for hits to miss. A milder variant could be distinguishing between proper hits and just glancing blows with reduced damage. Still, there can be value and sense in recognizing that some enemies are so much stronger that physically attacking them with a too weak character will fail to do any damage whatsoever. Hit points dashboard. We can follow our player's hit points by adding this to 07 draw map. Then we update 09 base screen to draw with it, like this. For now, the stats panel will simply be drawn on top of the map. HUD style, head-up display style. We might later make a paneled GUI layout with different areas dedicated to separate purposes. For example, log, stats, map, effects, inventory, and so on. For now, with this, we can keep track of our current hit points and follow how low they dip. Player death. To handle the player's death, a number of things must happen. First, let us update the until now fake alive check in 09 model to really work. This.hp larger than 0. This will activate a cascade of things. Base screen.npc turns continuously calls base screen.over, and now a dying player will cause it to discard the active game screen and to activate a game over screen. It will also abort the NPC turns loop and pass control back to the screen stack. This means we now have a game over mechanism active when the player dies. Our game over screen may leave a lot to be desired, but it works. At a later stage, we'll pass the game model to the game over screen so it can show some kind of post-mortem, a la you died by X being hit by a Y for N hit points, after the following happened. Monster death. Our change to alive means monsters can also die now. For that to work, we must react to such a death. Otherwise, nobody, not even the dead monster itself, will notice its death. It would continue to behave as if still alive. Welcome, zombie. The culprit is hit command.exec. which handles health loss with just a subtraction. That is insufficient. We need to make health loss its own thing, so it can involve dealing with the consequences, death. Death involves a couple of things. The monster must cease to exist in various ways. Above all, as a turn-taking entity, it must stop taking turns. This means it must be removed from the turns queue, which belongs to the map. Here we focus on consistency for the NPC monsters. The player himself may belong to multiple maps, so to properly clean up a dead player, we might need to remove him from every map. Luckily for us, the game ends when the player dies, so we won't address it here. But beware, you might have to solve this. If, for example, your game allows respawning your player on the old game world, you would face the problem of cleaning out his old corpses. Or maybe you could turn them into evil ghost enemies. Our O4 commands 11 health adjust file will start out like this. The damage part will be what you see here. Notice that the attacker part is not resolved here yet. For now we'll just pass null. Eventually, adjust will have to provide the identity of the attacker too. And the mob dies part will be this method. We can then update hit command to do this instead with adjust. Player attack. We have one more adjustment to make. By now, the enemy mobs can attack us through mob AI2cat and move bump command. We must give the player similar access to move bump command. We add this piece to 09 pass player. And then in pass player pass key command, we replace the move command call with this line to use move bump command instead. You can now try to run the game again with index 11 cat and see what happens when you bump into cats or cats bump into you. With this, the basic mob combat death mechanism works. If someone, for example us, hits a mob below 1 hit point, the mob will be declared dead and removed from the turns queue. However, it is rather anticlimactic. Apart from the monster character disappearing from the screen, it's hard to tell exactly what happened. Maybe we could communicate some details of the fight through the user interface. Maybe some kind of log.